Hi folks, it's Carlton from the Pharmacy Seeds Network. Just wanted to give a quick update tour and show you how the farm's doing this time of year. July 21st, 2019. So this video is a quick general ram pump update video. Just kind of giving a report mid-season here about how things are performing. Along those lines, water levels are down a bit. I did some modifications to the spring to help compensate for that. We'll look at that in a minute. It's been really hot and sunny and dry here for a bit, and so I did some extra irrigating with the foliar feed pump here. This is a flow jet pump, and it does about 5 gallons a minute, and it runs on 12 volts, and it draws about 8 to 10 amps. So I have a rechargeable marine deep cycle battery, and I just plug that into the greenhouse solar charging system and let it charge in the day. And then nighttime I bring it down here and I can do about a 3-hour pump cycle, which it's 5 gallons a minute, but up through the slope and the line you lose some, so you're down to about 4. So let's see, 4 gallons a minute, 60 minutes, about 240 gallons an hour. 6 times 4 is 24, yeah, 240 gallons an hour. So I can get a decent amount of water on, and more importantly I can do overhead irrigation, where the drip sometimes just doesn't quite provide the width of coverage that I want. So I use this in conjunction with the overhead sprinkler. Basically all I do is I pull the fitting off that goes to the garden hose for this, and I plug into the discharge delivery line that goes up to the reservoirs, and I can valve it however I want up top, whether I want to run irrigation or fill reservoirs or whatever. And then on the suction line, I just took the suction line in place of where I disconnected from the other one. And that way I can still pull the water through the filter so I don't get any dirt in the pump. And yeah, basically just use the pump as a regular pump. And then when I need to go back to foliar feeds, I just disconnect from here, put that back to there, and away we go. We're back in foliar mode. So it's a very handy way to supplement water movement when I need to. Eventually I want to get like a 1-inch gas pump as a backup and be able to really move a little more water. But for now this works great and doesn't cost anything, so that's always nice. Alright, let's go take a look at the spring for the ram pump, and then we'll have a look at the ram pump, and we'll go over how it's performing this year. So here we are overlooking the ram pump spring pond, and you can see there's a good amount of water in the pond at the moment. I've got the overflow set higher at the moment. Our spring water supply has dwindled a bit. I think we're down to about 8 or 10 gallons a minute directly from the spring. So as much as I didn't want to do this because I really like having just fresh spring water that I can drink right out of the line coming up, I needed the extra water for irrigation, and so I just cut a little channel here back to the pond so I could use the pond as a supplemental reservoir to help keep the spring supply going. And I know if you're not familiar with this, you probably don't recognize, but this is the intake filter that feeds to the ram pump. And so that pipe runs down in through the dam and out to the pump. We'll go over in a minute. But as you can see, we are pulling water, supplementing water from the pond through this channel, and that's managed to sustain pumping operations and made it so I can keep irrigating and watering chickens and really keeping the water flowing on the farm. So that's been handy. Every couple of days or so this goes low enough that this channel goes almost dry, the ram pump shuts down, and then I'll shut the ram off, and in about 12 to 24 hours it'll fill back up to about here, and then so we have a good reserve of water again, and then I can run a couple days again. I plan to do a modification upgrade on the supply line to the pump. We'll look at that in a minute. But I just thought I would show the spring side so you can have kind of an idea how things are going. By the way, in the background are a lot of awesome beneficial plants here. This is jewelweed. This is excellent if you get poison ivy. This will negate the itch of poison ivy, and it's a real easy way to do it. You just take it and you crush it up and you wet it a little bit. You make a poultice and you rub it on the poison ivy, and it'll dry the poison ivy out. And then this is watercress. It's actually going to seed now. Here was going to seed, actually past seed, but early spring this looks a lot more like lettuce, and it's a little more tender, and it's quite tasty as a salad green. I go on all day. There's all sorts of beneficial plants in here, but I just thought I would point out a few, and I really like being integrated directly with that ecosystem and not disturbing that ecosystem with my farming operations and my everything I do, really. Alright, let's go take a look at the ram pump side of things and we'll get into that. I guess I'll just give a quick shot of the wild blackberries that are coming on. Looks like another week or two we'll start to have some ripe blackberries. So that'll be nice. You can see there's clusters and clusters. Okay, so now we're back on the other side of the pond. We were just over there. Now we're over here. And I'll just show you real quick the overflow pipe. I stuck this 90 in. That takes the pond level up about 6 inches, and that's what gives us the backup water supply for the ram pump right now. When I shut the ram off for a while and let it overflow, it comes just about even or a little bit overflow on this, so that gives us about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of play in water. I forget what that works out to, but I think it's somewhere around a couple thousand gallons. Anyway, it gives us a decent buffer. Down below here, about a foot below that, I have a 2-inch line that I set when I reset this ram pump line. And my plan is to hook that up with a T and a valve to the main supply line that comes from the spring, which is this one right here. That other line comes out right underneath that 4-inch pipe there. And so my plan is to bring that out here and connect it in, and then when supply runs low from the spring, I'll still have about a foot of water over top of the level that we're at right now, and so that'll give me about 12,000 gallons reserve. So then I can kind of buffer, and I could probably run the ram pump for a couple of days on that, even when normal spring supply is low. So that's my backup alternate water source plan. I just haven't had a chance to get to the store and get the parts for it. My vehicle's still down, so a little restricted in movement at the moment. Don't worry, there's plenty of other things to keep me busy. So, ram pump is running well. You'll see that our level height is definitely much lower than it was. Normally it's quite higher, and you'll see the purple or the green tape. In this case we're a little bit lower supply, but it is still running and it's pumping, and I'll throw a clip in here of the overflow going into the pool reservoir. This is just a quick shot of the output of the overflow of the ram pump reservoirs into the pool, which is the backup master large reservoir. It's flowing well. This is what it produces through the upper reservoir up on the top of the barn, with no weights on the pump. So that's doing pretty well despite a relatively low water supply this time of year. And I guess I'll just mention while we're shooting here that these pool noodle floats that I put in are working out excellent. Have not had any major overflow issues with the pool, so we're able to store about 4,500 gallons of water again, so that's nice. Alright, so I had to pull, I'm using magnets for weights. So let me just mention that, because I don't know if I mentioned that or not. Let's shut this off so you can hear me. So I was using these N42 neodymium magnets. I kind of put them in here as an experiment to see how it would structure the water, and then I realized that they also fit on top of this foot valve perfectly as stackable weights. And of course they stay on without having to screw them on or bolt them on because they're magnetic. That little middle shaft is steel. The rest of that pump is brass. So it really works out well. So I found normally I can run 3 of those stacked together, and that gives me about 0.8 or 0.85 gallons a minute up top through the upper reservoir. And then obviously water production drops as I remove weights. I was, up until a couple days ago, running the single weight on here, and we were still getting pretty decent water flow, but we ran a little bit lower in water. It's been pretty hot and dry. We haven't had a tremendous amount of rain, at least not significant enough rain to soak in and affect the reservoir the spring reservoir. So I finally did come off to no weights, but that still moves water somewhere around 800 gallons a day. So that's not horrible. I can go through that pretty quick when I'm irrigating, but like I showed you, I'm using that foliar pump as a supplemental, so that kind of fills in the gap. So I guess I'll just mention while we're on the subject, supply for the ram pump with 3 weights on is about 15 gallons a minute to keep the pump running and pump water up top. As I take weights off, it goes down. I think the lowest runs down to around 8 gallons a minute with no weights on. I'll have to go back and measure that at some point, but it's around there. So even when I shut the pump off and I run the foliar feed pump as a supplemental, that only can move about 5 gallons a minute max, and then of course through line loss, restriction, and elevation change, it reduces the amount of flow. So it takes it down to around 4 gallons a minute, and that means that if this is pulling 8 and that's only pulling 4, that means there's an additional 4 gallons a minute we're not drawing when the ram pump isn't running. So actually when I'm running that foliar pump and irrigating at that speed, I'm actually still reserving more and more water in the ponds. So when I bring the ram pump back online, I've actually accumulated a bunch of water while I was pumping water. So I hope that makes sense to people. I guess that's everything. I just kind of wanted to do a midsummer update. Usually this time of year the spring would run dry, and if I didn't make that channel in the spring from the pond to the spring, we wouldn't be able to run the ram pump right now. So that's made a huge difference. And then once I get that upgrade, that'll give me a tremendous buffer, and I basically should be able to run the ram pump, with the exception of a really drought year, most of the time when I need it, and keep good water supply to the farm and not to be dependent on power. I do like that foliar pump as a backup, because that's solar powered as well, so no need for external fuel inputs. Alright, I think that's everything. She's pumping, and we got a good growing season going, and let's hope it stays that way. I hope you found this interesting or informative. If you have any questions about ram pumps or anything else along the lines of this video, don't be afraid to do so down below. Love to hear your comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if that's your thing. And thanks for watching the Pharmacy Seeds Network.